So toward the end of user directory, we started putting all the user data into an object before we started building the list items, right? Let's do the same with flicks, but let's do it from the get-go. So instead of just console logging this, let's make a variable called flick, const flick, and let's store that flick name in there. So flick is an object with a property name. Value of that is f.flickName.value. I could console log that whole object just to make sure it really is working. Yep. I've got an object with a name property with what I typed. Cool. You know how in a database sometimes you'll end up with a unique identifier for each row and it'll just be auto-generated and it's like a number that just gets bigger each time? You know what I mean? First record's 1, second record's 2. Let's try doing that. It seems like we could use some way to uniquely identify each of these records other than the name. Shall we? Yeah. So let's give each one an ID of something, of one more than the previous ID. So we need to keep track of the largest ID we've already assigned. How can we do that? No global variables allowed. We need to put it somewhere that handle submit will be able to get to it every time we submit. Say it again? Okay, so we could store it as a property of the object itself, right? We can store it as a property of app. Sure. It's going to, at any given point, contain the maximum ID that we've already assigned. So I'm going to call it max. So we could do it like this. I'm not going to do it like that, but we could do it like this. You can if you want to. I'm going to do it like this inside init. I'm going to say this.max equals 0. Same thing. I'm just initializing it to 0 every time, but only when init is run. So as long as you're not like running init in between each form submission, you should be fine. And then in here, I'm just going to assign one more than whatever's in this.max. And then I want to make sure that this.max is incremented for next time. How would you do this? Someone always suggests this. And it's usually not how I left to my own devices, it's not usually what I say, but everyone seems to know how this works, so we do it. How would you do that? I want to assign one more than its current value, and then I want to increment it so that next time it's already bigger. You know what plus plus. You all know plus plus? Do you know the difference between saying, say, plus plus I and I plus plus? So just in case, let's say I equals 0. Then let's say I plus plus. So I plus plus returns 0, but now I is 1. Starting over, I equals 0, plus plus I. Now that returns 1, and I is 1. So it's a question of whether it increments it before it returns it or after. So we could put which one here? Plus plus I, or not I, in this case max, right? So like plus plus this dot max. You know something else that's annoying me? It doesn't clear out the form each time. I forgot to do that. Let's do that, f.reset. All right. So let's see what happens. ID nan. What? What's nan? Not a number. Not a number. What's going on here? Let's put a debugger in there. See if we can get to the bottom of this. Put a debugger right after setting F. Refresh. Submit the thing. Okay, let's go to our console. Is F at least our form? Yeah, the world hasn't gone completely mad. This.max? It's undefined, not 0. What gives? Well, what's this? It's the form, not the object. We have been betrayed. Just when we were starting to like this, it pulls a move like this. This. What gives? I thought inside a method, this would be assigned to the object. Well, turns out the way this is assigned is not based on where you write the function so much as how the function is called. So if you call a method by saying something dot something, open close parens, you're calling it as a method, and this will be bound the way we expect. This will be the object that you put before the dot. Because it's when the method is invoked or when it's run that determines the binding of this. So if you invoke it that way with dot something parens, it's going to use method invocation, and this will be bound to the object. But we didn't. But we said this dot handle submit. So why didn't it work? Well, we didn't say this dot handle submit open close parens, right? We weren't the ones who ran handle submit. JavaScript ran it for us automatically when the event fired, right? And it turns out when that's how a function is invoked, doesn't matter if it's a method, this will always be bound to the event target. Bummer. So how do we fix it? Shucks. I can think of a couple of ways. I'll tell you this. I really don't want to change handle submit. I don't want to change anything inside that method. I want this to end up being the right thing. How can I make this the right thing? So when you invoke a method as a method using dot whatever, open close parens, this is bound the way we expect it to be. If, however, it's an event handler, it's always going to bind it to the target of the event. So how the heck can we make this bound to the right thing here? Anybody happen to know? Anybody have a guess or an idea? Give it a moment's thought. We know that event handlers always bind this to the target of the event. We know that methods, as long as you call them that way, using dot whatever, open close parens, always bind this to the object you called it on. So how can we fix our situation with handle submit? Yeah.
So inside the method for the event listener, like the method, like that can itself be a method which calls this handle submit with this dot.
You follow what he's saying? We know that if it's an event handler, this is going to be bound to the wrong thing. So what if handle submit isn't actually our event handler? What if our event handler is another function that calls handle submit? Is that what you're saying? Right? Yeah, that's one of the ways we could do this. Let's give it a try. Taking my debugger out of here. So if handle submit is called by saying this dot handle submit open close parens, this should be bound to what we expect it to. But it's the event handler. But what if it weren't? What if instead we wrote another function right here? And this function called handle submit. Now, that event object is going to be passed into here now, right? So I'll go ahead and move prevent default up there. But we still need to get the target, so let's make sure that we pass that event along to handle submit. So we put an anonymous function in there, and now it's the event handler, and it's the one with the binding that's going to get screwed up. And handle submit should get bound to whatever was in front of the dot. Let's try it. Don't need to slavishly copy just yet. Let's make sure it works. Refresh. This, you jerk, betraying us at every turn. Now it says this dot handle submit is not a function on line 9. Sure, handle submit isn't an event handler anymore, but this is. So inside this function, this isn't going to be the right thing. Betrayed again, but I like the way you're thinking, and we're going to make this work, by golly. So remember the other day, isn't this fun? So remember the other day, we used an arrow function, right? And we just used it the way we'd use any other anonymous function. But I told you it wasn't just a new syntax for the same thing. There was something slightly different about arrow functions, and that we would talk about it today. Well, now's the time. If you use an arrow function, so just take away the keyword function, stick that fat arrow in there, equal greater than. The difference between arrow functions and old school function declarations is this. No, I mean, it's this. THIS. When you do it this way, it's like the knights who say knee. Inside the function, this will be bound to whatever it was in the surrounding context. In other words, no more surprises. It'll be what we think it is. So let's try that. Now it works. Arrow functions to the rescue. And you may remember yesterday I said if there's only one argument to the arrow function, you can leave the parentheses out. You can leave them in if you think that's more readable or easier for you to understand. But you can omit it. What have you actually done since our... let's make sure if I add a second one, it goes to 2. Yeah, it does. Good. So what do we do? Actually, all we really did was store the flick in an object. I told you I could think of a couple ways to fix this problem. I like this one, so I'm going to leave it, but I'm also going to show you the other way real quick. If it's too much, if it's exploding your brain, just ignore me for the next few moments. But I'm going to show you the other way to do this. Arrow functions, by the way, were just introduced in ES6 or ECMAScript 2015, so they're fairly new. ES6 is very well supported now, so you can do this most places. Occasionally, you might still run into a project that's all in ES5, and you might not be able to use arrow functions. But here's a way that has worked for a long time. So add event listener. Submit. This dot handle submit. I've used the word bind several times, or bound. As I'm talking about this, I talked about what this is bound to inside that function. Well, it turns out function objects all have a method on them. Yeah, functions can have their own methods because they're objects, called bind. And, well, actually reading the documentation there is kind of interesting. I can't read the top of it, though. For a given function, creates a bound function that has the same body as the original function. In other words, bind here will return a new copy of handle submit that has been modified. Whatever we pass in as the argument to bind is what this will be bound to. So if I do this handle submit.bind this, then whatever this is on that line will be what this is inside handle submit. So this would accomplish the same thing. Another interesting note here, if you've ever been wondering how do you pass additional arguments into an event handler, this is how. Any additional arguments you pass to bind will be passed as arguments to the function. And if you're going to do that, it's worth knowing that the event, because we always know the event's going to get passed in as an argument, right? The event will always be last. It'll always be the last argument passed in. But if you need to pass arguments into an event handler, you can always do this thing too, because here we can pass whatever we want. So that's the other way we could have fixed this. But I like arrow functions. They're grand. We're going to do this a lot. It's going to become second nature sooner or later. You won't even have to worry about it. You'll forget that the reason we do this is because of this. But you've experienced the pain once, so it's good to know. And congratulations, afternoon class, on following the exact narrative of the morning class, answering the questions the same way so that we got to demonstrate exactly the same pitfalls. That's fun.